we're going to begin the show today with one of the most sickening comments to have come out of Donald Trump's mouth to begin his second term. I mean this with every fiber of my being. I may legitimately crash out during this segment because it is so fucking despicable what we're about to talk about. I was watching it live last night and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was in actual shock watching Trump do this press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. This happened, I don't even know what the fuck today is, Tuesday night. Bibi came to the United States to basically have a goon sesh with Donald Trump, where they just both edged each other over the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. Before we get into this story, I want to just let everybody know, if we were a functioning country, if we were a civilized nation, if we were actually the liberal democracy that we pretend to be, Benjamin Netanyahu would not have been allowed to step foot on American soil without being arrested. Straight up. This guy does not deserve to leave Israel. He should not be able to travel anywhere without being sent to a special prison just for ghouls like him. It's disgusting that the United States is one of like literally 4 or 5 countries that allow this man to travel to it. He has arrest warrants out for him, and yet he can just come here to the Capitol and stand in the White House as Donald Trump perpetuates pro-Israel and pro-genocide propaganda while he smiles smugly behind the podium. So one of the most frightening tidbits that came out of this press conference was Donald Trump's admission that the United States is going to take over and rebuild the Gaza Strip. I don't know where to begin with this. So we're just going to read through the article first, and then I will, in all likelihood, give my thoughts at the end. This is courtesy of the Associated Press via the Huffington Post. President Donald Trump suggested that displaced Palestinians in Gaza be permanently resettled outside the war-torn territory and proposed the U.S. take ownership in redeveloping the area into the, quote, Riviera of the Middle East. Trump's brazen proposal Tuesday appears certain to roil the next stage of talks meant to extend the tenuous ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and secure the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza. The provocative comments, and that is a very mild adjective to describe this rhetoric, came as talks are ramping up this week with the promise of surging humanitarian aid and reconstruction supplies to help the people of Gaza recover after more than 15 months of devastating conflict. Conflict is their word, not mine. Now, Trump wants to push roughly 1.8 million people to leave the land that they call home and claim it for the U.S., perhaps with American troops. This is the second time he's floated this idea. Originally, he suggested that the Palestinians relocate to Egypt and Jordan. Now, he's just telling them that they have to fuck off, that they can't live here anymore. How is this rhetoric allowed to fly? This is genocidal rhetoric. This is ethnic cleansing. This is the removal of an entire country's worth of citizens to a different place, he doesn't even specify, so that the United States can take over and rebuild Gaza. What if what if Justin Trudeau was doing a press conference one day and was like, yeah, so we're just going to take Connecticut. Connecticut is now part of Canada. Would this fucking fly? No. How is this America first? What the fuck is so America first about taking money and resources and rebuilding the most destroyed country on the planet. Why don't you rebuild America? Why don't you work on fixing the homelessness epidemic? Why don't you work on rebuilding our infrastructure, on upgrading our airports and our regular ports and our roads and our bridges? Like, how? Oh my God. I'm like, my brain is melting because the whole fucking time, the entire fucking time he was on the campaign, America first, fuck everybody else, America first. And then his first 2 weeks in office, he hasn't done anything to address the cost of living. Housing prices are out of control. California is on fucking fire, and he's seemingly not going to do anything about that. He wants to dismantle the Department of Education. He wants to dismantle the Department of Labor. He wants to dismantle the IRS. Elon Musk is in the process of doing that right now. Where is this agenda that he so talked about? And where is the respect for the Palestinian people? Why is it so difficult for Westerners to treat them as human beings? Quote, the U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip and we will do a job with it too, Trump said at an evening news conference with Benjamin Netanyahu by his side, stroking his dick. The president, who made his name as a New York real estate developer, added, quote, we'll make sure that it's done world class. It'll be wonderful for the people, Palestinians mostly, we're talking about. Do you know the monetary value that it will take to rebuild Gaza? Nobody does. Do you know why? Because you can't estimate it. Israel has spent 15 months reducing this entire swath of land to nothing but rubble. We're not even talking about rebuilding homes and businesses. We're talking about redoing the entire infrastructure to support 2 million people. Why is Trump's base in favor of this? Why did they think this is a good idea? Why do Republicans think this is a good idea? This is antithetical to everything that he ran on. And also in this conference, he was making it seem like these buildings just collapsed, like it was a fucking tsunami, like a tsunami, a typhoon formed in the Mediterranean Sea. It never happened before. And it just leveled Gaza. Meanwhile, the reason it's like that is because of the dipshit that was standing to his right. How he spent 15 months bombarding this country with American-made weapons. By the way, I think that is worth noting that our tax dollars not only funded the destruction, but would also fund the purported rebuild, quote-unquote, that Donald Trump is talking about here. Also, keep in mind that these bombs were still flying during the ceasefire. So that gives you a really solid indication of where Israel is at on all this. Spoiler alert. They do not want a solution. This is the solution that they want. What Trump presented in this press conference is specific for Benjamin Netanyahu, so that way Benjamin Netanyahu can stay in power. Trump outlined his thinking as he held talks with Netanyahu at the White House, where the two leaders also discussed the fragile ceasefire and hostage deal in the Israel-Hamas conflict and shared concerns about Iran. Trump said the U.S. would redevelop the territory after Palestinians are resettled elsewhere and turn the territory into a place where, quote, the world's people, including Palestinians, would live. He offered no detail about what authority the U.S. would use to take the land and develop it. There is no authority. You can't just do imperialism. If the United States were serious about upholding the international law that they crafted, you wouldn't just be able to take over Gaza. But it doesn't fucking matter because the United States, for the last 80 years, has done specifically this. They've gone into places where they're not supposed to be and claimed it as their own. Hawaii, Puerto Rico, numerous countries all around Latin America, whether it's actual imperialism or just the implementation of a dictatorship or a far right U.S. aligned government. This is U.S. foreign policy. And here's a clip of him saying it, by the way.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
Hey, buddy, whatever happened to doing that in America? Why don't you bring jobs back to the Midwest? Why don't you stimulate manufacturing in Kansas and Ohio and build more housing so that way we don't see our homeless population continue to go up? Where is that? Where is the focus on doing that here?
Do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
The U.S. tried this in Iraq and Afghanistan. They occupied both of these countries for decades, spent trillions of dollars trying to instill democracy. That is their classification, not mine. And it was an abject failure because these countries don't want to be occupied by a foreign adversary. They want to be sovereign. They want to have their own government. They don't want interference. The reason why the Middle East is so destabilized is because of Western interference. Because the United States and their allies went in looking for oil and then used the quote-unquote terrorism as a guise to remain in, even though the word terrorism is arbitrary in its meaning. But terrorism to the United States applies specifically to Arabs. They view Arabs as terrorists. It is rooted in Islamophobia. It is rooted in the U.S. government believing that these people are barbaric because they don't share Western aligned values. It's not about rebuilding Gaza. It's not about investing in jobs and infrastructure. It's about serving Israel because apparently Benjamin Netanyahu has actual dirt on Donald Trump because Donald Trump is acting like a fucking submissive dog. This is a grown-ass man, the president of the United States, buckling and being subservient to one of the grossest, most disgusting world leaders that we have seen in modern politics. Do not misunderstand me. Benjamin Netanyahu is the Hitler of our time. What he is doing in Gaza, what he is doing to the Palestinian people will be analyzed and studied by historians, and that will be the assessment. This guy is a modern-day Hitler. 90% civilian casualties, more than 100,000 estimated dead. The 46,000 that have been killed is a gross underestimation, around 40% or so. The fact that they've taken out aid workers, doctors, haven't allowed aid to flow into Gaza. And when Joe Biden got wind that this was happening, he didn't level any consequence on them. They bombed buildings, they've bombed hospitals, they've bombed schools, they've destroyed infrastructure. These people don't have access to water, they don't have electricity, they're malnourished. Children are dying because the IDF are shooting them execution style in the head. Their faces are being blown off. They're unable to get anesthetic for the reconstructive surgeries that they have to undergo. And Donald Trump is here whitewashing all of that, saying that, oh yeah, no, Gaza just got hit with a tremendous natural disaster and we're going to give aid to them. I mentioned before, this is the same asshole that doesn't want FEMA to exist. He wants the states. He wants North Carolina. He wants California. He wants Florida to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Nut up or shut up, Ron DeSantis. You just got hit with the hurricane and you need $20 billion to rebuild Tampa. Tough shit. FEMA doesn't exist anymore. Meanwhile, all of that money that could have been funded into FEMA is quote unquote rebuilding Gaza. Meanwhile, all it's going to be is another military occupation. Israel will be able to quote unquote dissolve the apartheid state and have U.S. military soldiers doing checkpoints on Palestinians instead of them. The article continues. Egypt, Jordan, and other U.S. allies in the Middle East have cautioned Trump that relocating Palestinians from Gaza would threaten Middle East stability, risk expanding the conflict, and undermine a decades-long push by the U.S. and allies for a two-state solution. Show me the push. The only push that I've seen over the last couple of weeks is the tush push from the Philadelphia Eagles. There is no interest in a solution to this conflict. And we will get to Kamala Harris, and I will get to liberal Democrats for their view on this. Donald Trump's position on this during the campaign was finish the job. Kamala Harris's view on this during the campaign was Israel has a right to defend itself. But what Israel is doing is not defensive. They are perpetuating this conflict. They have done in October 7th every day since October 7th. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry issued a sharply worded reaction to Trump, noting their long call for an independent Palestinian state was a, quote, firm, steadfast, and unwavering position. Saudi Arabia has been in negotiations with the U.S. over a deal to diplomatically recognize Israel in exchange for a security pact and other terms. Quote, the duty of the international community today is to work to alleviate the severe human suffering endured by the Palestinian people, who will remain committed to their land and will not budge from it. The Saudi statement said. Still, Trump insists the Palestinians, quote, have no alternative but to leave the big pile of rubble that is Gaza. Why is it a big pile of rubble? Cause and effect is taught to fucking first graders. Something happens, right? This is the thing that happens. This is the thing that caused it. Where is the cause to this effect? Oh, that's right. It is $20 billion of U.S. taxpayer money being sent to Israel, weapons manufactured with U.S. taxpayer dollars being sent to Israel that they then use to kill innocent women and children under the guise that they are Hamas. Even though Hamas accounts for like 1% of the population of Gaza, somewhere around there. They estimate 20 to 30,000 Hamas fighters. But then they'll say, oh, Hamas is using civilian structures to hide themselves, which is, of course, not true. Israel could bomb military structures, but they decide not to. Iran struck Israel's military structures. You mean to tell me that Israel does not have the military capability to actively target Hamas? There's the video of Yahya Sinwar as he dies. It's filmed on a fucking drone. A drone was used to kill the leader of Hamas. And you're going to sit and tell me that Israel just has to bomb all of these civilian structures because Hamas is underneath them? Spare me. Last week, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Jordanian King Abdullah II dismissed Trump's calls to resettle Palestinians in Gaza, but Trump said he believes Israel and Jordan, as well as other countries which he did not name, of course he didn't name, will ultimately agree to take in Palestinians. Quote, you look over the decades, it's all death in Gaza, Trump said. This has been happening for years. It's all death. Gee, I wonder why. It's almost as if Gaza is part of an apartheid state set up by Israel, where Israel has routinely gone after Palestinians for no reason other than the fact that they are Arab. Even Palestinians who don't get slaughtered by Israel live in a society where they have no civil rights. If we can get a beautiful area to resettle people permanently in nice homes where they can be happy and not be shot and not be killed and not be knifed to death like what's happening in Gaza, all of that is done by the IDF, by the way. So Trump at least knows what's going on. And yet he thinks that the solution to this is to displace all of these people. Trump also said he isn't ruling out deploying U.S. troops to support reconstruction of Gaza. He envisions long-term U.S. ownership of a redevelopment of the territory. The president's proposal was greeted with alarm by Democrats and a measure of skepticism by his Republican allies. He's completely lost it, said Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut. He wants a U.S. invasion of Gaza, which would cost thousands of American lives and set the Middle East on fire for 20 years. It's sick. Buddy, no, oh my God. It's really upsetting that we have to discuss this monetarily, but a lot of the times that's the best way to get through to people. It's going to cost trillions of dollars to occupy this land if if Donald Trump wants to do it. Why can't we use that money here? Why can't you just facilitate a two-state solution? We know the answer. I'm being rhetorical here. He doesn't want to. Benjamin Netanyahu is soon to be Donald Trump's only ally because he is straining relationships with Canada and Mexico. He is straining relationships with the EU, not only over the whole not only over the whole Greenland situation, but now he's preparing to levy tariffs against the EU. He is pushing every Western aligned country into the Chinese sphere of influence, and he doesn't fucking recognize it. He is straining relationships with every major leader on the planet. Instead of trying to build prosperous economic partnerships, he wants death and destruction. He wants the military-industrial complex to continue doing what it does. That's why the Department of Defense is not even thought about when it comes to budget cuts. And because of these actions, Donald Trump recognizes that Benjamin Netanyahu is the only ally he can have. And he's going this route specifically because if the war is over, if the war ends, Benjamin Netanyahu will be kicked out of office because his coalition is collapsing. The only way he stays in power is if he continues to destroy Gaza or he builds a greater Israel. And that's why Donald Trump is doing this. Lindsey Graham, a South Carolina Republican and Trump ally, says, we'll see what our Arab friends say about this. And I think most South Carolinians are probably not excited about sending Americans to take over Gaza. I think that might be problematic, but I'll keep an open mind. Lindsey Graham is such a fucking cuck. Don't keep an open mind about it. Don't play this both sides bullshit. You know that your constituents, the folks who elected you, do not want this. And you're going to sit here and pander to your big greasy overlord because you just love him and you love Israel. Lindsey Graham, the dude who tweeted more times about Israel than he did South Carolina. What a fucking disgusting pig. The White House focus on the future of Gaza comes as the nascent truce between Israel and Hamas hangs in the balance. There is no truce anymore. It's off the table. It may be a truce now. Israel has no interest in continuing this. They're bombing Gaza during the ceasefire. I saw a video of a kid get fucking killed during the ceasefire. And you're going to tell me that there's still this brewing truce. Netanyahu is facing competing pressure from his right-wing coalition to end a temporary truce against Hamas militants in Gaza and from war-weary Israelis who want the remaining hostages home and for the 15-month conflict to end. That is the only appropriate answer here. That is the only humane end to this whole situation. The fighting stops. There's a two-state solution. All of the hostages are released on both sides, including the American-held hostages. And then you allow the Palestinians to have their own state. You allow Israel to have their own state separate from one another. The Palestinian people do not have to be subject to apartheid any longer. They do not have to be subject to death and destruction. Children do not have to be born and immediately spawn in with PTSD because all they know is their house being bombed and their family being killed. Trump may be betting he can persuade Egypt and Jordan to come around and accept displaced Palestinians because of the significant aid that the U.S. provides Cairo and Amman. the U.S. is not doing foreign aid anymore. I don't know if Trump is aware, but U.S. aid is on the chopping block. I don't know if it specifically applies to Egypt and Jordan, but I'm sure that Doge is going to look at that and say, "Oh, we don't need to fund Egypt anymore." Hardline right-wing members of Netanyahu's government have embraced the call to move displaced Palestinians out of Gaza because they're freaks and belong in prison. They're genocidal freaks who belong in jail, a special jail only for people who have contributed to this genocide, that being Joe Biden, that being Donald Trump, that being Benjamin Netanyahu. The ICC also has arrest warrants out for the leaders of Hamas, the ones that are still alive. Fuck it, put them in the jail too. I don't give a fuck. As long as Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are put in prison, you can put all of Hamas in the jail. To me, it's unfair to explain to Palestinians that they might be back in 5 years. What? To me, it's unfair to explain to Palestinians that they might be back in 5 years, said Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy. That's just preposterous. Trump also signaled that he may be reconsidering an independent Palestinian state as part of a broader two-state solution to the decades-long conflict. Quote, "Well, a lot of plans change with time," he told reporters when asked if he was still committed to a plan like he had laid out in 2010 that called for a Palestinian state. "A lot of death has occurred since I left and now came back." Wow, really astute analysis there, champ. This is... I know the Associated Press is trying to posture as a legitimate news organization, a legitimately unbiased wire news service, but this is just misinformation. I read this quote, and I'm not seeing any signal that he's reconsidering an independent state. He literally just said the Palestinians have to go. He's the owner of the club. It's 4 a.m. The lights come on. He said, "You have got to get the fuck up out of here." Where is the consideration for this? Netanyahu's arrival in Washington for the first foreign leader visit of Trump's second term coincides with Prime Minister's popular support sagging, really indicative of the times that we're at, where this guy, this fucking freak, is the first person to set foot, the first world leader to set foot in the United States. Canada is like 12 hours away from Washington, D.C., but Donald Trump has strained his relationship with Justin Trudeau that he wants nothing to fucking do with it. The Prime Minister is in the middle of a weeks-long testimony in an ongoing corruption trial that centers on allegations he exchanged favors with media moguls and wealthy associates. He has decried the accusations and said he's the victim of a witch hunt. Yeah, just put the fries in the bag, buddy. Being seen with Trump, who is popular in Israel, could help distract the public from the trial and boost Netanyahu's standing. "We have the right leader of Israel who's done a great job," Trump said of Netanyahu. Netanyahu praised Trump's leadership in getting the hostage and ceasefire deal, the same hostage and ceasefire deal that he declined multiple times, by the way. The Prime Minister also spoke glowingly of Trump thinking outside the box. Quote, "You say things others refuse to say, and after the jaws drop, people scratch their heads and they say, you know, he's right." I don't know what fucking outside of the box thought he had. Maybe him and Bibi got fish fillets from McDonald's and Trump was like, you know, you can actually put the fish fillet as a bun and eat it that way, or something fucking weird like that. Hamas in a statement decried Trump's comments. "We reject Trump's statements in which he said that the residents of the Gaza Strip have no choice but to leave, and we consider them a recipe for creating chaos and tension in the region. As I mentioned before, the Middle East is unstable because of Western intervention. Generally, unstable places are the result of meddling in their domestic affairs." Netanyahu met with White House Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Witkoff on Monday to begin the daunting task of brokering the next phase of the ceasefire agreement. The Israeli leader said he would send a delegation to Qatar to continue indirect talks with Hamas that are being mediated by the Gulf Arab country, the first confirmation that those negotiations would continue. Netanyahu also said that he would convene his security cabinet to discuss Israel's demands for the next phase of the ceasefire when he returns to Israel at the end of the week. Witkoff, meanwhile, said he plans to meet with Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani in Florida on Thursday to discuss the next phase in the ceasefire. Qatar and Egypt have served as key intermediaries with Hamas throughout the conflict. Netanyahu is under immense pressure from hard-right members of his governing cabinet to abandon the ceasefire and resume fighting in Gaza to eliminate Hamas. Bezalel Smotrich, one of Netanyahu's key partners who also has a warrant out for his arrest, vows to topple the government if the war isn't relaunched, a step that could lead to early elections. Freakazoid behavior that this guy is willing to dismantle the government if a genocide cannot continue. Hamas, which has reasserted control over Gaza since the ceasefire began last month, has said it will not release hostages in the second phase without an end to the war and Israel's full withdrawal. That was a key point as to why the talks for this ceasefire originally broke down like a couple days before they went into effect, was because Hamas wanted Israel to withdraw farther out of Gaza. And Israel originally declined that proposal, which again speaks to their intentions. If you are so invested in getting a ceasefire, I do not think that that is an irrational compromise for Hamas to make on behalf of the Palestinian people. Withdraw all of your troops out of our borders, and then we can continue with the next phase of the negotiation. Netanyahu, meanwhile, maintains that Israel is committed to victory over Hamas and the return of all hostages captured on the October 7th attack that triggered the war. He's so invested in bringing home these hostages that he, at every turn, has worked to not bring home the hostages. He's allowed hostages to fucking die because he wants to exterminate the Palestinian people more than he wants to bring back the hostages. That much is clear. Some of the response to this, the response that has driven me fucking bananas, especially from liberals, is they're seeing this happen. And they are so fucking smug in their assertion that this would not have happened under Kamala Harris. You're missing the whole fucking point. These dipshit, limp-dicked liberals are trying to play this off as a victory when people are still fucking dying. And they're overlooking the fact that Kamala Harris failed at any point in her campaign to say that she would negotiate a ceasefire. That was not the plan. You're living in fucking la la land if you think that this would not have eventually happened under Kamala Harris. Am I speculating? Yeah, I am. Is Donald Trump an accelerationist in this regard? Yeah, he is. But at no point did she ever say that she would stop the fighting. At no point did she ever say that she would stop giving arms and aid to Israel. At no point did she pressure Joe Biden to stop sending aid to Israel. There was no indication from her that this was an actual concern. Even when protesters brought it up, when she was doing that fucking speech, and one of the protesters mentioned Gaza, she said, I'm talking. Shut the fuck up. Talk about a ceasefire. It's so disgusting that people are looking at this catastrophe, this historical catastrophe, and are so blinded by the team sports aspect of politics that they're like, well, it wouldn't have been this bad under Kamala, but it still would have been bad. It's not that hard to understand. There's only one answer to this conflict, or to this quote-unquote conflict: the ceasefire and the two-state solution. If that is not your solution, you cannot chalk this up as a victory, because you would still allow these people to fucking die, all because of Israel, because you're worried about looking like a fucking anti-Semite, because you're calling out what this is. People say, how could you watch the Holocaust happen and not say anything about it? And yet there's a whole fucking political ideology on the left side of the political spectrum that is standing by while this happens. It's so sick. It's so fucking sick to have that point of view over this. While people are dying, children are dying, their lives are being fucking destroyed. Everything that they know, everything that they love is being vaporized in front of them by a genocidal freak funded entirely by the United States. And all Joe Biden had to do at some point was cut the funding, turn the hose off. At any point during her campaign, if Kamala Harris said that she would have worked to broker a ceasefire, she would have fucking won. This cost her the election because she is Diet Trump on this issue.